It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon Podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, John, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It could be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later. Hello and welcome to Babylon 5, 30 years later, the podcast where John Wilson and I go through everything Babylon 5. And when we say everything, we don't just mean all the TV episodes, all the made-for-TV movies and the direct-to-video movies.
That would be too easy, Blaine.
Yes, it would be. See, John and I share this little quirk where if we're getting into something, we are all in and need to check it all out, as you may have noticed when we went through the comic series. Well, now we are talking about our third novel that came out from Babylon 5 to help fill this original broadcast break that we are in. So, how are you doing, John?
I am doing all right. We've got Blood Oath by John Vornholt up today. And I remember that when we talked about John Vornholt's first novel, which was called Voices. Accusation was the second one. That we were kind of middling on it, particularly as it relates to some of his choices in, responses to female characters and that sort of thing. And I think you'll agree with me that whatever he was on that day, he's doing much better this week. I rather enjoyed this book.
Yeah, this one showed a significant improvement. I think there was one line that felt almost like he was trying to justify his choice at the beginning, where Garibaldi said that he was a bit of a connoisseur and thoroughly studied the female rear end. Because, as we said last time, that's how he identified Talia in a crowd.
Right.
You pull that one sentence out, and there's no sign of that anywhere else in here.
And to be fair, there's a very, very big difference between I like to look at a girl's rear end and I identified a woman by the shape of her derriere. And those are very different moments.
They are very much so. All right. So this novel was the third one released. It came out in 1995. In continuity, it is sometime before season 2, episode 9. So probably not much before that.
So we've gone from a few episodes of gap between the book and what's been aired to basically a year. These books all seem to be taking place in early season 2, which granted is an easy time to take place in because the big, huge movements and shakings of season 2 have not happened yet. But we have now gone almost an entire year of episodes, and we're still in that same little era.
We are, and for all practical purposes, this is almost a direct sequel to season 1, episode 5. That Parliament of Dreams, yeah.
It really is. The authors have been bringing in elements from previous episodes, but this one does probably the most.
It does. Not to tip my hand too much, I have started reading our next one, and there is a jump ahead, so it is set much later in season 2.
Okay, good.
So there's a bit of a shift there, but I suspect it's just a case of having to set it there because, as you said, massive moving and shaking completely rewrote the status quo in that season 2, episode 9. And because of how much time it takes to write a novel, and because of how protective JMS was of spoilers getting out, the information that they needed to write episodes set after that just wasn't available at the point where they needed to get started on the outlines to publish these.
Right.
I suspect that's what's going on. In any event, we have 17 chapters in this one. We have a set of new characters. So we have Mara, who swears a Shankar against Shakar. She's part of the family that had the Shankar against him in that Parliament of Dreams episode. The one that kept him out of the festival, showing all the religious beliefs of all the different peoples. So we didn't really hear about the Narn religion at that time.
Which, as a reminder, Shankar is basically where the book gets its title. It's a blood oath. It's a oath to kill a person based on some really major grievance.
Yes. So that family had originally hired assassins to come after G'Kar, and he and his assistant at the time managed to get them off the station. So we also have Panar, who's an informant and partial confidant of G'Kar. And I apologize, there's going to be a little bit of jumble in the relationships as we go through these characters. I was putting them in a spreadsheet in the order they were introduced. We have Takog, who's the brother of Mira, and also part of the Shankar. We have Al Vernon, a human importer of alien technologies who works on the Narn homeworld. We have Vin Tok. He's the captain of the Kasha Navas vessel, who is in G'Kar's trust, and G'Kar shares some of his secrets with him. Yaltar is the first officer of the Kasha Navas. Dan Leffler, as far as I can tell, has no relation to Robin, is a security officer who gets attacked at one point. Yatok is a Narn noble person who's a member of the Inner Circle. Rapak is a member of the Inner Circle. Yatok is a member of the Second Circle. I think I said Inner Circle there too. Dakal is G'Kar's wife. Kahet is Durag's widow and mother of Mara and Takog. And Paco is a young boy in the border zone who is friends with Mara. That's the border zone on Narn.
Because we do go to the Narn homeworld in this one.
All right, so quick summaries of each chapter. Chapter 1. G'Kar is warned via a pre-recorded message that there is a Shankar sworn against him. It's Bara who recorded that message. And after deliberating, G'Kar decides he cannot recruit allies, so he leaves for homeworld to deal with this on his own. As he leaves the station in his personal craft, the ship explodes. Warren Keffer is dispatched to lead a search party, but the destruction was total, and G'Kar is declared dead. As far as I can tell, in the publication history of Babylon 5, this is our last appearance of Warren Keffer.
Unless he shows up randomly in a novel that takes place during season 2.
Yep.
Bye, Keffer. We hardly knew you.
Yes. Okay, Chapter 2. Natoth is informed of G'Kar's death by command staff. Garibaldi finds the data crystal with the threats and goes to Natoth for more information, finding her in Londo's quarters. She, quite understandably, had assumed the Centauri had something to do with G'Kar's death and took her personal investigation in that direction. Chapter 3. The command staff watches Mara's video message with Natoth present. All are now satisfied that this is an internal Narn matter, and Natoth explains that the Shankar is legitimate. G'Kar had grievously harmed Durag and his reputation.
Durag.
Durag, yes.
Because a durag is a head fashion accessory.
Yes. Sorry. G'Kar awakens from a nightmare based on accurate memories of people trying to kill him on the Narn homeworld. And he awakens in Down Below on B5 under the protection of Panar after faking his own death in Chapter 1. In Chapter 4, Ivanova decides to make friends with Natoth before her trip to the Narn homeworld, hoping Natoth will agree to act as guide and escort to herself and Garibaldi. Natoth requires little convincing, provided that nobody interferes with her Shankar. Meanwhile, G'Kar and Panar are forced to assault a security officer in order to continue undetected. That's specifically Officer Dan Leffler. In Chapter 5, Garibaldi and Welch communicate as Leffler's absence is noted and his unconscious form is eventually found. The Narn vessel arrives, and G'Kar's memorial on B5 is held, with a passive-aggressive tribute from Londo and an angry tribute from Delenn, who is angry with the murderer, not with G'Kar. G'Kar is secretly present, trying to sneak onto the Narn vessel Kasha Navas in order to get back to the homeworld. News of G'Kar's death reaches Mara and her brother Takog. A member of the Thenta Makur Assassin Guild claims credit to them privately in order to get Mara to stop trash-talking the organization, although he asks Mara to allow the general public to believe that she was responsible without explicitly claiming such responsibility. Chapter 6. After the memorial on B5, Garibaldi is approached by Al Vernon, a struggling businessman who would like to get to the Narn homeworld. Garibaldi orders a background check, and while nothing contradicts Vernon's story, there are gaps. Vernon joins Garibaldi and Ivanova aboard the Kasha Navas. None of the delegates from B5 are aware that G'Kar is already on board and hiding with the help of Captain Vintok. With Talia's help, a now awakened Leffler tries to remember details of the assault. Meanwhile, on the Kasha Navas, the passengers get a tour of the ship, limited though it may be. Chapter 8 on Babylon 5, Pinar is interrogated by Sheridan and Welch with the help of Talia Winters, and they suspect Pinar believes G'Kar is alive. On the Kashan Navas, Garibaldi and Ivanova get Natoth to help them access the hold, where they find G'Kar alive and well, and he starts providing some explanations for his actions.
I'll take the back half. So Garibaldi, Ivanova, Natoth, and Al Vernon, they always say his entire name, Al Vernon, they attend the memorial service for G'Kar on the Narn homeworld. During the ceremony, Garibaldi spots Mira and pursues her, getting close enough to tell her that he knows she didn't kill G'Kar, but that she needs to stay away from Babylon 5. There is also some apparently mutual attraction between the two. G'Kar asks for help in seeing his widow, as he is, quote-unquote widow, because he's not really dead. He's unsure how she'll react upon learning about his deception. They apparently did not have the smoothest relationship. There's also a note that in Narn culture, having mistresses and whatever the male equivalent is not uncommon when you're separated from your spouse for a while. During the, once the group have helped pay Al Vernon's bar tab, they do go to see Dekal. Mira returns home to learn that Dekal, the widow, has now given her family a substantial amount of money. This is as a result of the conversation between G'Kar and Dekal. There's some debate about what they will do with it, and meanwhile Al Vernon convinces the other humans to stop waiting for Hamok, which is G'Kar's secret name, as he's undercover, and Al does not know that it's a fake. And Al leads them to the bottom of Hekba City Canyon, because it's at night, it's super freezing on the surface, and down in this canyon there's fires and there's warmth. Al quickly disappears after they get down there, and the others learn that the Kashan Navas has left orbit while they were trying to find a place to stay. So now they have nowhere to go and no way of contacting home. G'Kar leaves home, leaves his wife behind, to find the rest of the party has left the cold surface, so he doesn't know what to do. In his disguise, it's not safe to follow to go down in the south, because as a lowly crewman, he's not of a good caste level to be accepted down there. So he needs to come up with some other plan. Al Vernon, meanwhile, has arranged lodgings for all the humans and Natoth, but Natoth wants to wait for Hamok. While going to the inn, the three humans are greeted by Rapak and her cousin Ramon, who give them a chance to contact Babylon 5. So this is a noblewoman down below who befriends them. With the Kashan Navas reassigned and out of orbit, Captain Sheridan promises to send an Earth Force ship to pick them up in several days' time. So Kashan Navas did not just leave them behind mysteriously, it was reassigned by the authority of the Inner Circle. Now the plan is for Garibaldi and Ivanova to speak to Durog's family and then go home as soon as possible. The party eventually reunite at the inn once Natoth finds G'Kar upstairs. More concerningly, Rapak informs Mira that G'Kar is still alive. So now Mira, who has the blood oath against G'Kar, knows that he has not actually been killed. And Mira starts recruiting people to change that. The group finds the Durog home, and they manage to negotiate peace with Mira. Al Vernon leaves first to join a disguised G'Kar outside, and the pair see signs of a trap. They manage to warn the others when they come out. Mira calls for an assault to begin, and the streets are filled with armed Agri Narn, because the peace with the family was maybe sincere on the other family member's part, but not on Mira's part. She is determined to see G'Kar dead. The party are under heavy fire, but Paco appears, little orphan boy. He leads them to the underground catacombs. Their pursuers are numerous but amateur, which is the primary reason the experienced soldiers survive. They are, unfortunately, unable to hide G'Kar's true identity from Al Vernon any longer. So while they're roaming under the catacombs, which are left over from ancient times, just like Roman catacombs or such, G'Kar's identity is finally made known to Al Vernon, and the group comes out of the shrine into the open air, and they find a trap waiting for them at the exit. They head back into the catacombs in the shrine and hire Paco to bring them supplies as they wait out their pursuers. But sadly, we learn that Paco is a member of the Thenta Makur Assassin League, and the supplies, food, and drink that he brings are poisoned. Final chapter, The poison is clearly deadly to Narns, but it's only a hallucinogen to humans. So Ivanova is able to make it to a clinic that she saw on the surface, and she returns with an expensive antidote. There's a lot of talk in this about racking up expenses, and that she uses her credit chit to pay for stuff. That's chit, C-H-I-T. Mira follows her down into to find the others after a report from Paco, and she is ready to kill G'Kar. But at this point, the other shoe falls with Al Vernon, who strikes a deal saying he has a data crystal from a Centauri, who we find out later was Londo Mollari, and this evidence will clear Durog's family name, proving that Centauri were responsible for the crimes Durog was accused of. And this is enough to end the Shonkar from Mira without any further deaths or injuries, and everyone is able to make it back to the station, return to their lives, though hurt and, at least as far as G'Kar is concerned, very humbled in the process. And we've had 2 books that were good portraits of Talia and Ivanova. And this was a fantastic portrait not only of G'Kar, the character, but the Narn culture as a whole, which we have not seen a whole heck of a lot of on the show, and in events that take place after this novel has been vastly traumatized. So setting this novel before the Centauri War and giving this, I thought, was a fantastic way to bring out those elements of the world right now at the beginning of season 3.
Yeah, this is it's a good way to understand what was lost. Right? It's set just before we have that time. We get a fairly clear picture of what their society is. We see, some of the ramifications of the original Centauri occupation, just commentary on the social structure. So they're still recovering from the first one when they get hit by the second, and how devastating that is. So I think we've pretty much already said this, but based on John Vornholt's first B5 novel, I did not pick this up with high expectations and was very pleasantly surprised that this was, I think, significantly better than his first outing.
His Star Trek output that I have read has varied in my enjoyment level. So he's one of those names that, he can definitely write a story, but how much I'm going to enjoy the story and how much he's going to engage me can vary from book to book kind of widely. So I just never quite know what I'm going to get into with him. But yeah, this was really great. I started out the book kind of feeling like in order to write Narns, you just have to know how to write Klingons. But it wasn't really that far into the book before I realized that was reductive and unfair. They may have similar starting points in how you can understand them, but there's a lot of nuance and a lot of difference that I enjoyed and appreciated as we were going through. They're not just another show's Klingon aliens. They do have some similarities, of course, as is obvious from the blood oaths and the high emphasis on honor and the family legacy being affected by one person's, all those kinds of things. But it's not just Klingons.
Yes, and I've always found it. I want to say it's a curious coincidence, but it may not be. The Klingons weren't really fleshed out, I think, until about the mid-'80s with the Star Trek movies and The Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
And they bear a lot of similarities to the Kzinti that Larry Niven writes about in his Known Space series, which were licensed by the Star Trek people for Star Trek the Animated Series.
Right, because you did have the Kzinti in one of the episodes.
Yep. Yeah, and they were mentioned a couple of times there, and they were mentioned again in, was it Discovery or Picard? I think it was Discovery, where they get a name check. And I was curious. I think it's Discovery, because that one has gone back to the animated series quite a bit, and I wonder if the people knew it was a Larry Niven property and if he got paid for that name drop in the streaming.
I've wondered if the Zenkethi were a way of acknowledging the same kinds of things with a, somewhat different name. It's a similar enough name that they could, pretend it was the same thing. But I don't know. That's a Star Trek rant, which, might be appropriate between us at some point in the future.
Yep. Yeah, there are times. It's just to me, watching the animated series, seeing the Kzinti there, reading the Kzinti novels and short stories that had already been published when they started to define the Klingons and looking at how the Klingon definition was going, it seems like that maybe Babylon 5 is not the only property that Star Trek has borrowed from.
So there were so many things about this that I thought were worthwhile. Obviously, when Jakar's death happens at the end of the first chapter, everyone knows he's not dead. But what actually happened? How are people going to find out? Once we see that he's alive, the beginning of the chapter is in a dream, but you don't realize it's a dream. And it feels like he's on the Narn homeworld. So we're like, oh my gosh, how did he get there? But no, he's on the station on Babylon 5. Then it becomes a matter of how's everyone going to find out? Then it becomes a matter of, okay, now that all of our primaries know that Jakar is alive, how are we going to resolve the situation that he was actually trying to get away from in the first place? So there's a lot of levels that you go through in your journey of the story. It's not a simple murder mystery. It's not a simple follow the trail of evidence kind of thing. There's some good storytelling here.
It is. It's, how do they put it on writing excuses? It's very much a yes and, where solving one problem leaves you with a bigger problem. So it's a way to keep moving the plot forward without spinning your wheels. Because they talk about how you can have things that are just distractions. They're things that get in the way, but they don't actually change the status quo once you've resolved them.
Did I know you listened to Writing Excuses? Because I love that show.
Yeah, I don't know if you did. But yes, I am up to date on them.
Okay. I'm not up to date, but I've listened to a lot of the old episodes. There just are a lot of old episodes.
Yes, I've listened to actually all but today's.
Okay. Do you read Brandon Sanderson?
No, I haven't read his stuff yet.
Okay. That would be a whole other conversation. Okay. Speaking of podcasts. So yeah, like you said, yes, and it takes us further and further and further into the story. Every time we find something out, we're wondering new things. Journeying to the Narn homeworld. I said this is a portrait of Jakar and of the Narn culture. Unlike the first two books, which were primarily through the POV of the person we're getting a portrait of, this book is not primarily from Jakar's point of view. It's maybe about a quarter from Jakar's point of view. Most of it we see through the eyes of Garibaldi and Ivanova. But that's kind of how we learn about the Narns, because we're seeing the Narns through a human lens, through a human perspective, which as readers is helpful. But, they see Jakar and we see some stuff through his eyes, but it's just, I don't know. I was fascinated the entire time by all the things we were learning and just the world we were in, the caste system, the I don't know, a lot of things.
Yeah, it was a lot of good world building. I think it suffers a little bit from having been plotted so easy or so early in season 2. We know Sinclair was officially the Earth ambassador, so I assume that Sheridan has taken on that role as well. So I question whether Sheridan should have stayed behind on what was essentially a diplomatic mission if he is the ambassador. It feels almost like he was left behind, and every one of his scenes is when he's on the job rather than off the job, just to give Vornholt some wiggle room, because he had to plot it early enough that he didn't really know who Sheridan was, because it was a fairly new character at the time.
Yeah, because even though this came out during season 3, it's still being written a ways back. We're finally getting to the point where people who are writing these books have probably actually seen some season 2 now, instead of just being given scripts and notes.
Yeah. So without knowing how much was available, I think it just feels to me like that choice makes less sense in universe, although it makes perfect sense on the production side.
Mm-hmm.
So I get why Vornholt just went with it. Again, we keep trying to not compare this to Star Trek and not keep bringing up Star Trek, but there were so few other games in town when this came out. And I'm just thinking back to that original Star Trek Next Generation 6-issue miniseries that DC published, where the first issue came out the same week Encounter at Farpoint hit the air.
Oh, wow.
And those issues just feel wrong in so many ways.
The first half dozen novels feel pretty wrong, too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that creative team had done great original series Star Trek, and they would do great Next Generation stuff down the road. they just did not have the opportunity to see the material that their stuff was based on. They're going for the series Bible before they made some changes. I swear, in some of those panels, they'd almost had. It felt like they had erased some of the original art and replaced it because Denise Crosby was originally cast as Troy.
Oh,
and Surtees as Yar, when she had a different name, and then they did the role swap, and it's almost like the pencils had to be redone to adjust that. So.
There's a book, I don't know if it's Ghost Ship, because that one has data on the cover, and this is the data point that I'm making, but there is a book in one of those very first Next Generation novels that came out that basically explores and resolves every question that Data is going to wrestle with in the course of the series. So like if that had actually, quote unquote, happened in continuity, there would be no Data arcs for the rest of the Next Generation. Yeah. But, when you're writing a story and you're writing about, an android exploring humanity, you want to explore those things. And that particular writer didn't stop at the line. But anyways, so yes, Al Vernon, I need to talk about him. I don't know if you felt this way, but I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop with that guy.
That was what I was going to say when you said, the other shoe drops. You found out that, that he was actually hired by Londo Mollari. Like, that shoe was being held, poised to drop since the page he was introduced.
Yes, they made a big deal about how he's just kind of out of nowhere and not sure we can trust him. But hey, we're going to trust him anyway because, why not? We need someone to show us around Narn. And then just the entire time. And now it was in chapter 14. In chapter 14, when Al Vernon and G'Kar go outside, Al says something about, you can always trust me to fulfill a contract. And I was like, oh, he's from the McClure people, the assassins. He's going to fulfill his contract on G'Kar. I was convinced. And so whenever Al Vernon says, hey, I see something out there, and they start watching, I'm like, okay, he's going to pull a gun on him. He's going to pull a gun on. What's going to happen? And then no. And they keep going, and they go down to the tunnels. And the very moment when Al Vernon realizes that G'Kar is really alive, he runs off. And I was like, of course he runs off because he has to get a good, vantage point to kill him secretly. Thentamacore, that's the word. But no, he just tripped over stuff in the dark. And then it turns out Paco is the Thentamacore. And I'm like, okay, then what's Al? And it's not till the last friggin' chapter. He's like, I had this data crystal in my pocket the whole time from Londo. I was like, okay, well, that's fine. It's a little bit more disappointing than what I had in my head, but it works.
Yeah, I had that same thought when they talked about him, or when he made that comment about fulfilling a contract. So I think that was deliberate. So
deliberate red herring.
Yeah, and just to be clear to the readers, there's stuff in the dialogue. Like, that's why in the summary I specifically said that there was gaps in the background check. Right? He said he was desperate for cash, and yet they couldn't check his financial records because he hadn't used his chit, so we didn't know what financial position he was really in. So, yeah, I don't think John Vornholt expected anyone to think that Al Vernon was who he presented himself as at any point in the story.
Right.
He effectively gave us the red herrings to make it difficult to guess what was really going on, but he knew we were going to be saying, what's really up with this guy? Because he's not who he appears on the surface.
Right. And at times, because it took so long, at times I was worried that I was overthinking it and that there wasn't going to be any big reveal, that he was just a guy, just some guy, So I was actually relieved whenever he turned out to have the evidence needed, which also is a really key element of the story, because once everything is starting to work out and everyone's realized that G'Kar is, going to be okay and make it, the question becomes, okay, well, what about this whole blood oath? What about I can't remember the Narn word for it now. Shankar, that's been, sworn out against him. They're going to have to resolve that. They're going to have to satisfy that somehow. And Al Vernon was the one that had the magic piece of information to do that.
Mm-hmm. But because we've been waiting for that shoe to drop for 11 out of 17 chapters, it didn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina. Like, we've known there's something going on with this guy from his introduction. So when we finally find out what it is, it's like, okay, we can accept that, yes, he was sitting on this, especially when he talks about the conditions under which the Centauri hired him, which was, hold this in reserve, only use it if necessary. If the situation looks like it'll resolve itself the way we want, just keep your mouth shut and walk away.
I like Londo's phrasing. If it's convenient, if you can, you might save Jakar's life, but it's like, don't go out of your way.
Yeah.
Speaking of that whole relationship, so Jakar kind of goes through the mill on this, faking his death and trying to find out why people wanted to kill him, and then reintegrating himself into his life. And he does get humbled in the story. This story leaves a different Jakar than the one in the first page. And for that reason alone, I feel like its publication right now feels so key and so important, because slotting this in as an episode in its spot in season 2 definitely would feel appropriate to the kinds of person we see Jakar to be in the wake of the Centauri conflict. Did we need an active humbling experience to explain it? No. But knowing that there was some things that kind of took the edge off of his arrogance going into this whole horrible situation that the Narns are in right now on the show was, for me, gratifying.
Yeah, it's additive and consistent with what we saw. Like I said, not strictly necessary, but it does dance within the raindrops, as Dan Slott likes to say.
Mm-hmm.
If he's going to be writing a tie-in comic or writing stories set in the past, he doesn't want to contradict the writers that came before him. I think one of my favorite examples of that from his run on Spider-Man is when Peter and Aunt May are talking about the night that Uncle Ben died. And we find out that Aunt May has been upset with Peter since then, because on the night she needed him most, he wasn't home. He ran out. She didn't know that he was Spider-Man and what he was doing, tracking the burglar and trying to avenge Uncle Ben. She just knew that there was 2 important people left in her life. One had been taken from her violently and unexpectedly, and the other one was not there to lend support. Right, that kind of thing where you're just putting a new perspective on it. And I think that's not quite to the same scale, but that's what we're seeing here, where Vornholt has found a piece that connects dots that were already connected. He's just adding a little detail to that path.
Yeah. What else in this? Even though we do get a lot of Jakar and Ivanova's perspective, we don't really get much in the way of character development from them. It really is a showcase for Jakar and the Narn culture, which is not a complaint at all. It's just clarifying the structure.
Yeah, those are our lead characters, and I suspect that those are the 2 that were chosen simply because they were more familiar for Vornholt in the planning stages, and I think we should be coming out of that period now. I suspect because of JMS likes to plan, I think we talked about it, he likes to have 3 or 4 episodes a season that feel like you've been whacked upside the head by a 2x4. And that is running every season. So there's major events mid-season every time. So I think as we go through, I haven't read any of the upcoming novels, just the first few chapters of book 4 here. But I suspect that we're going to see them all set several months prior to the episodes that come out at the time the book is published, just to continue supporting that.
Yeah. And in a show like Star Trek, where continuity from episode to episode is much less of a thing, you can just say it's set during this season, and you get you understand the dynamics of the characters' relationships. Babylon 5 has a much more episode by episode event oriented continuity. And so you can't just say during the 6th season. You have to say, okay, yeah, but before this key episode and after this key episode.
Oh, and in Star Trek, if you're not using a recurring villain, you often don't even need to specify which season it's in, right? Like,
true.
Some of the scripts from season 7 could have also worked, pretty much season 2 on. Because I would say, like, Next Generation, by the end of between the death of Tasha Yar Worf getting promoted to chief of security and Geordi getting promoted to chief engineer at the start of season 2. Right? Unless Laura is back, or the Borg are back, or Lursa and B'Etor are back, if you've got a standalone adversary, the character uniforms might be the only thing that tips you off about whether it's season 2 or 7.
I think there are subtle differences in character development and maturity and stuff that you could key into, especially as a writer, where you can get in characters' heads a bit more. Where you could make writing season 2 Geordi and writing season 7 Geordi feel different, and I think that's true for any of the characters. But yeah, as far as the technical stuff, the details about how the diorama is laid out of the show, there aren't a whole lot of changes from season to season.
Yeah, there's certainly vastly more wiggle room on almost any Star Trek than there is on Babylon 5.
And in my first watch through that I'm doing of Lois and Clark, in the next few weeks, I'll be getting into the Lois and Clark novels. So I'll be curious to see how they handle their tie-in fiction, because other than the growth of the romance between Lois and Clark, there are virtually zero signposts between, and Luthor's fate. There are very few signposts between season 1 and season 2 of that show. So I'll be curious to see how it goes going into season 3 when the books start coming out.
Yeah, I was going to say there were some cast changes between the end of season 1 and the start of season 2 there. But,
well, yeah, but that's not going to affect the writing.
Yeah, again, that's another one where, as you were saying with TNG, it's one of those series where if you know which season and then you're good. Because I can't think of any example of status quo changes other than the current relationship status between Lois and Clark that are really significant in that series.
Yeah. So, I feel like there were one or two other points I wanted to make about this book, but I did talk about it being G'Kar. I did talk about it being a portrait of the world. I talked about Al Vernon. I talked about the Klingon thing. So those are the things that are sticking out in my head about the things I wanted to mention from this book. Just that I, like I said, thoroughly enjoy the reading experience. Would recommend.
I would too. If anything, I would question why Paco made his move so late, given how many times they were dependent on his guidance. Which
I don't think he made his move almost immediately after finding out G'Kar was alive.
That's true. Yeah, that could be it. It's just he didn't move because he was waiting to see where G'Kar was.
Yeah, no, he up until that point he was just a kid helping out people. Once he realizes that G'Kar is alive, he now has Thenta McCour stuff to do.
Yep, you know what? That hadn't occurred to me because we'd known. I mean, you said before everyone knows, meaning, of course, every reader knows G'Kar's alive.
Right.
The characters,
and the primaries.
The primaries were fooled for about 2 chapters.
Yeah.
Right. It took them some time before they got the definitive answers. So that's still like Act 1 stuff in the 3-act structure.
Yeah, but once they're on the planet, all of our regulars know. Na'Toth, of course, knows, but they're keeping it a secret from Al and from anyone else they come into contact with. And then once it comes out for everybody while they're down in the catacombs, they don't know it, but they've just flipped a switch on Paco's mind. That's how I read it, at least.
Okay. Yeah, so that resolves that. Like I said, this is not like the last one where I had a couple, or when I say the last one, I mean Vornholt's first book, that Voices. That one had multiple red flags. This one doesn't. This feels like one of the tie-in novels that works really well because the characters are consistent with what we've seen on screen. It mostly fits into continuity. We'll see what happens because, we're introducing a wife for G'Kar. That's something that, may or may not play out in the series.
Right.
Right. Everything that they're adding here to the Narn culture, we have to see if the series treats it in a consistent fashion after that. We assume
that he's using notes from the creator, but exactly how he used those notes versus how the show will use those notes are anyone's guess.
Yep. And apparently there were times where the writer's first draft or earlier drafts were consistent with Straczynski's notes, and then editors required changes that were not run by Straczynski in some of these books as well.
Okay.
So there's some issues. That's why few of them are considered canon by Straczynski, but at least this book, at the time it came out, it feels like it fits within the raindrops, but the same could be said about issues of the Star Wars comic where Luke and Leia were dating. So,
which I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Luke and Leia having a romance between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. Honestly, it does not bother me whatsoever.
Yeah, it was after Empire, but before Jedi.
That also doesn't bother me, except the fact that we saw her kissing. Well, I think whenever she kisses Luke in the comics after that, it's like a comfort thing because Han is gone and they already had a comfort level between them. So yeah, still, I don't mind that. Doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah,
not even Lucas knew that they were siblings at that point.
This is true. It just, the plans that the writers had for the characters coming in before Jedi had to be rewritten in a very big hurry when Jedi came out. Which is the kind of thing that you run a risk of with some tie-in fiction. So again, back to Star Trek, that's something I will give them credit for with the IDW series that was in the Kelvinverse timeline. They were working with the Kelvinverse movie writers to make sure they weren't contradicting each other all the way through.
Right.
So they had the sit-downs together so that, if you only watch the movies, as the vast majority of media consumers did who were watching it, they weren't reading the tie-in comics. If you're only watching the movies, you got a complete story. But if you also went to the tie-in media, nothing was contradicted, which is appreciated by this fan.
Yeah. But as far as books that could be considered or will eventually be considered canon in the Babylon 5 novel line, at this point, based on what is known of the series at this point at the beginning of season 3, this feels like it could have been in that list. None of the first 9 are. We're reading these first 9 books because they're Babylon 5 books, and because if we were fans at the time, that's a choice that we might have made. I realize that you were a fan at the time, but like fans at the time could have been reading these books, and this would be part of the building of the world for some fans who like their tie-in fiction. So that's why we're going through them now, not because they're canon or not canon, but this does feel like the kind of story that could be considered canon based on what is known at the time.
Yeah. And just to clarify, of the first 9 books, one of them actually is considered canon.
Oh, what are the first 9 is?
Yep. One we haven't gotten to yet, but one written by Catherine Drennan.
Catherine Drennan, yep. I remember seeing that now.
Yes. Yeah, she wrote By Any Means Necessary and was married to JMS at the time. So she had access to she had access to more information and more clarifications. And given what they meant to each other, she may have been more motivated to stick to his vision and get his approval than some of the others. So, yeah. So some of these novels are, this one, for example, if we look at the Babylon 5 wiki, they actually state, this one is not canon. Our 4th book, Clark's Law, the one we will do the next time we do a novel, that thing on the wiki actually has some bullet points that say, it's considered non-canon as it stands because it contradicts what's in here. But they say, if you rewrite these 3 paragraphs, it fits.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll see how that plays out. As we said, we've just started reading it. Do we have any other thoughts on this, or should we?
I think I'm good. It's the timing of the book works really well because as viewers, we're very sympathetic to the Narns right now. So getting a portrait of their pre-war culture works very, very well. And getting to know Jakar better right before his entire world is shattered also works really well from the storytelling point of the series. So yeah, on multiple levels, I was really happy to read this right now.
Okay. All right. So in that case, let's wrap up and move on to what's coming next. So in 3 weeks' time, we will be back on the broadcast with Voices of Authority. And that kicks off a 5-episode run of continuous weeks before we come back to that 4th novel of Clark's Law.
5 episodes.
Yes, which is interesting for the scheduling choices that P10 made again. This time, they actually do give us a break on a cliffhanger. Because we have...
Oh.
Yeah. So we have a 5-episode run that ends with 2 episodes that are considered the first 2 parts of a trilogy.
Interesting. Okay. Fun times.
Yes. So we'll have those coming up, and then a couple of episodes in between covering a novel and other bonus content prior to wrapping up that trilogy. Okay, so until then, thank you for listening.
And good eating to you.